It's hard to show your value in L&D, and it's an expense. It's not a cheap thing for a business to provide these services. And when you deliver the thing, it can feel like something you can show. And so people have always gone back to that because it feels tangible. It feels like something we can deliver. Conversations move in one direction or another, but they can feel harder to say you're adding value until a little bit later, a little bit longer in the process. It's also not the people we've hired and brought up through this system. Those people are deeply steeped in adult learning theory. That's what they understand. That's what they deliver. What we're looking for today is business advisors. They're consultants. They're the same people I'm working with at RSM, and that's a different job. You need to be able to take these professionals who are so good at what they do and such experts and have them actually use the tools they've been using for traditional learning and turn that around in advisory capacity. It's similar thinking, but far different execution. And I do think that's really hard for people.
Kim, it's really great to have you today. I'm really excited about the conversation that we had around the evolving profession of L&D and to dive into it a bit with you. So thanks for joining.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited as well.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just get started, right? There's a bit of a moment right now for L&D. I think there is a long-standing narrative we've always heard, like L&D has to become a strategic partner to the business. And now I think the point you made last time was you have to go from like a knowledge provider to an advisor, and it's really important now. Can you help me, first of all, define what you mean by that and why this has persisted for so long, but companies or functions have not made the leap yet?
Absolutely. AI is going to democratize knowledge in a way that has never happened before, and it's moving so quickly we can't keep up. There's just no way for any team to be staffed enough to be able to do the things in this new environment. I think the reason we've had a hard time making this shift, and it's always been critical, but it's hard to show your value in L&D, and it's an expense. It's not a cheap thing for a business to provide these services. And when you deliver the thing, it can feel like something you can show. And so people have always gone back to that because it feels tangible. It feels like something we can deliver. Conversations move in one direction or another, but they can feel harder to say you're adding value until a little bit later, a little bit longer in the process. It's also not the people we've hired and brought up through this system. Those people are deeply steeped in adult learning theory. That's what they understand. That's what they deliver. What we're looking for today is business advisors. They're consultants. They're the same people I'm working with at RSM, and that's a different job. You need to be able to take these professionals who are so good at what they do and such experts and have them actually use the tools they've been using for traditional learning and turn that around in an advisory capacity. It's similar thinking, but far different execution. And I do think that's really hard for people. When I started at RSM, I had some really good learning folks on the team, but they like to deliver what the business asks for. It feels good to do that. And starting to say no and starting to reshape the conversation is hard. And so I think that's why we've been struggling with it. I just don't think we have a choice at this point. It's not much different than the consultants I work with, right? If you read anything on LinkedIn, consulting is one of those professions they're worried about in the age of AI. But we know at RSM that because we're really forging strong relationships with people and we're able to connect dots that AI is not going to be able to do with our clients, that we're still going to continue to be needed and wanted out in that environment. And we're the same thing inside of learning. We're those consultants. We need to be able to be better than the machine that is going to be able to deliver information.
Fully agree with that. And like everyone needing to become more of a sort of the consultant makes total sense to me. I'm curious about the dynamic you're seeing. And my question here is before, a lot of business used to request content. Hey, give me content on this, give me training on that, give me this, give me that. And like L&D was like so busy like doing the thing. Did it just used to crowd the work that they could be doing, but you're so caught up in doing the basic thing that so you never got to like the more fundamental like capability building and deeper transformation work? And once you allow business to kind of self-serve that, because that's sort of what's happening with AI, do
Mhm.
they start naturally wanting something more foundational, fundamental from L&D, or is it like they kind of don't know what L&D can help with, and L&D has to reframe its like value very proactively? Like, what are you seeing actually in your interaction?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, at least where I am and the places that I've been. Traditional learning is a thing we all grew up with. So we all went to school, we all went to university or college, and that's actually my background. And one of the things that I recognized early on is that formal classroom learning to me was less effective than the things that we did outside of the classroom. And I was always drawn to that experiential learning. And I thought when I got into the corporate learning space that that would be a natural link because
Yeah.
people are working, and it's not. There's actually more requests for formal learning in a corporate space than there was, in a university setting. I don't know that the business actually understands that we are not just learning and development, but we're really talent advisors. We're really workforce planning. We can support succession management, but that's not the business's fault. That's our fault for not actually talking about those things in the language of the business. We talk like learning people. We talk about our content and our courses and how we do that. So as the business can get that knowledge easily, take that opportunity and really seize upon it to say, how do we apply that in different ways? How can we challenge you in different spaces? And how can we bring that old apprenticeship model back that used to be the thing that everybody did and actually make it true learning in the flow of work? So we talk about that all the time in learning in the flow of work. But what does that actually mean? It means that we have the strongest leaders that we possibly can. So they're noticing intentionally when they can make meaning of practice, when there's things that are happening, how they can give feedback in the moment, how they can grow professionals. That's something that we don't do. We do a training on leadership development and hope that that translates. Now it's our time to really take that to the next level and bring those leaders along with us and say, okay, what are we doing now? How are you making meaning of that? So I think the challenge is not the business knowing what we can do. It's whether or not we're able to talk about it in a way that feels valuable to them, that they want to look to us to help grow and drive performance, and that we can thoughtfully help them grow their business.
Yeah, I love the way you said, it's not really learning that you need as per se. It's like a talent advisor. In my mind, for you to be this consultant that can help people solve problem, like learning is one of the levers, but it's not the only. And in fact, learning should really be like experts on humans, right? Like
Mhm.
the science of people, like what allows people to learn, adapt, behave in a certain way. And if you're not seeing the behaviors or performance you're expecting, there are a lot of barriers. One of which is they don't know the skill, but it could also be that they don't want to do it, even if they know it, or they can't do it because the organization doesn't let them to do it, even if they know how to do it. And I feel like it's like that broadening of the scope. So you really think about, you have humans that are here, but they're not being able to do the thing they could really do because they're constrained. And like helping figure that out, I feel like could be the broadened mandate for like learning.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about skill, hill, will all the time, right? We can build skills, but if somebody's not interested, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And oftentimes, when a leader will say, we need this training, as we dig in a little bit, it's really about unclear expectations.
Right.
It's
Right.
about, right? So that I can't train that out of the person on the other end. People are messy, and we should actually embrace that messiness because that's where the learning happens. And sometimes when we put a formal learning in place, there isn't space for that messiness. We might have pockets of it, but it's in the work that people are doing where the real learning will happen, but it only happens if there's intentional feedback, if there are points of connection that people are making. And I don't think we do that very well in a fast paced business. It's just harder. I will talk with the team often about how can we make it easy for people to do the right thing. So can we give those leaders tools or frameworks that don't feel like something extra, but can actually be embedded in how they lead or how they host their meetings, that pulls from sometimes formal learning to re-emphasize it or reinforce it in different ways. But by doing that, we're really encouraging those behaviors that create an environment for learning. Outside of that, we're giving one time off events and hoping that it sticks, and it rarely does. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't remember a lot that I learned in the classroom, but I certainly remember sitting in my student government meeting back in college and, arguing through some things and my Robert's Rules of Order, and it stuck because I was doing it. We have to continue or, reintroduce that pattern back into the workplace and make sure that that's our focus as much as possible. The knowledge will come, and we may not even need to learn it in the way that we did. We might just need to know how to access it, but we will have to know how to recognize when it's not right. And so, those critical thinking skills, those are all things we're going to need to build through practice.
Right. And like I think for me, and I agree with it. And then a lot of the classroom training that exists out there are like neat frameworks and theory that like dies the instant it hits reality, right? And the best experiences, and you could design formal or informal learning around this, much better approximate the messy reality of it and get people to grapple with the gray of it. It's like feedback doesn't work magically because you use the SBI framework. That's like that's like the starting point. But like there's a great version of it, there's like mediocre version of it. You gotta feel the degrees and the trade-offs, and creating environments where people can grapple with it, I think is pretty key, whether it be formal training or informal stuff or on the job. And I think that's creating those conditions seem like a good thing that L&D can definitely like focus on.
It is. And, there's always going to be some barriers to that. So for me in professional services, the three letters I wish I'd never heard, CPE, are required for everybody in that firm. That comes from more traditional learning generally. And so that's always going to be something that we have to build and deliver for our
Yeah.
consultants, for our accountants and tax folks. However, that's not where they're going to get the bulk of their learning, and it's not going to drive performance. So we still have this need to figure out what that connective tissue is between that formal learning and the practice that they're doing so that they're able to go out and be agile. Because the other thing is, our jobs aren't linear in a way that they used to be. There's so much ambiguity every day in the way that we're moving and operating. And so we need people who can react in the moment, who can adapt to some of those scenarios. And you can't learn that in a classroom.
Maybe diving a little bit more into the shift you mentioned for L&D, right? Going from knowledge provider to the talent advisor. Can you share a little bit more, like what you think are the components of that shift? Like how would you show up differently if you're an L&D practitioner who's made that shift? Like how would you engage differently?
I'll tell you actually the true story of how we've started this at RSM. So when I joined the firm about 2.5 years ago, we were a delivery center. That was the model. And we were actually structured to serve our clients by service line. So inside of consulting, we have 7 unique service lines, and we had learning professionals that were assigned to each of those service lines. What that resulted in was a real customer service model. So not an advisory or consultancy, but they asked, we delivered. So the first thing I did was really reshape the way we were working and kind of shuffled the deck. And it made everybody on the team very uncomfortable. And that discomfort is actually what got us to the point where we could be true business advisors. Because, if you're a manager working in learning and your background is to be an expert in that area, and now you're meeting with a partner who's bringing in millions of dollars for the firm, and you're saying, I hear what you're asking for. I hear why you would think that was the right solution. Let's talk through that. That's hard. That's really hard. And it's hard because you're not used to it. It's hard because of the power differential. The way that we shifted that was we really came together as a group and did a lot of coaching on a weekly basis to say, what were the challenges we were facing? What were the things that we were doing? But at the same time, we were still doing the thing. And the reason was we had to build that credibility. And if we stopped doing everything that L&D had done in the past and just shifted this model, they would have rejected us and they
Right.
would have built shadow teams. And there are some anyways. I won't say that there are not. Those existed before I came, and they'll probably continue to exist after I leave. But we had to do both at the same time. And so sometimes I joke that it felt like we're holding a boulder while we're trying to do the work over here. But that credibility building was really what enabled us to, in pockets, be able to form the relationship where people said, oh, I'm going to start with this group because they actually know what I need to do. I'm not going to bring them my, 60 slide deck so that they can deliver it for me. I'm going to say, this is the problem I'm struggling with. What do you think we should be doing? It's messy and it's really hard. And so my team will tell you, if you ever talk to them, that there was about a year that we were all just wanting to do something different at times, because you don't get a lot of the business excited about the fact that you're going in it with a different approach.
Right.
They're used to you just delivering for them. At the same time, I think they see the benefit on the other side. So if you're a modern L&D person, you have to be good with advising. You have to have really strong business acumen. You need to know how to read a financial statement and talk in the language of the business. You still need to be able to go and facilitate that workshop on leadership and deliver a great program. You have to be a communications expert. So you kind of have to be a little bit of everything to the business to be able to be successful. Just like that agility they have to have, I think L&D needs to be agile. They need to slim down their timelines. They can't take, 12 weeks to build a course. We need to think about what is something that we can do in 2 weeks to get it off the ground because it's urgent. It's really a mindset shift for us in this profession to be able to do this differently and to show up better for the business.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a really cool story, by the way, of a very courageous functional transformation. I would love to hear actually a little more from your vantage point as a leader, like who's like trailblazing this. The pushbacks you got, the way you got buy-in to do this, what allowed business partners to start to see the value, like specific instances where they're like, okay, I actually see why this is valuable. Because those practical stories will give like more tips to other L&D folks in like how they can make the transition.
As I said, it was really hard, especially with leaders, on my team, the managers who were working with me who had come from a traditional learning background. And consulting, I say, is very entrepreneurial. So they have a spirit where they like to do things themselves. And so sometimes it feels like we're just following behind them and trying to say, whoa, 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 wait, if we brought you over here. And so that continues. I don't want to say, this transformation is done. We've really gotten in pockets where we found success. The pushback was, that's not the way we do things, or I need this because I can see that this person needs training or these people need training. It was just that, historical mindset. And it's not wrong. I mean, it's how people have grown up. And so the pushback was, stop asking me to do something differently. I've got enough change happening. I've got enough things going on. Can you just go do the thing for me? What we ended up doing, and one of the biggest success stories was in our risk consulting practice. So, one of my managers, Beth, came in and they wanted to do this big training, this big formal training. And they had the deck, they were ready to go. But what they wanted to do was actually educate people about their product set and then help people understand how to cross-sell it across the practice. So their intent was to educate everybody in all of these sessions about the product. We talked to them, and Beth and I worked, and we worked as a team to say, you know what? You have these placemats. They're great. Anybody can go and look at them. What you need is the behaviors to change so that people start to think about, oh, we actually might do that over here. What would that look like? Where do I go? How do I use my resources? So restructured the entire built for them, the online training, so that it wasn't about the product, it was about the behaviors. It took a lot to convince that business that this was actually going to be effective training. But it's a perfect example of how we work in the day of AI, right? It's the behaviors that need to shift. It's not the information. The information's always going to be available. When that happened and the team was able to look back and say, oh, we actually advised the business on a different direction. Not only that, we've been able to lift and shift that same approach to multiple business units, and they've been able to use it again, so we don't have to keep building something new for everybody. They started to see how they were having an impact in a different way. So they didn't deliver what was asked. They actually went around and delivered something better. And I think that really shifted the approach. On the other end of the spectrum, there's been a group that their strategy, and I put it in quotes, for learning was always, a series of built. So they would do these video presentations, decks, and, that's not a strategy. There wasn't really anything aligned to it. It was just that they could check the box throughout the year. And they were a really challenging group. And so one of my other managers really had to work with them to help them see that the time and the opportunity costs for their consultants who are billing out, 800, 500, whatever an hour to be sitting through this series of builds that actually wasn't having any impact on performance was an expense that the firm didn't need. We had to come in with some different options, and some of them were simply, an infographic or a guide. Sometimes we shifted something to an email. Sometimes we actually did, a learning event that made some sense. But as the business started to understand why we were doing that and how it made sense, they started coming directly to that manager. And so those moments, I think, allow people to feel their own success in the process. And that can help you ride the wave for a little bit. Doesn't mean next week someone's not going to be yelling at you again because you're not doing what they've asked, for. But it really helped, I think, shift the mindset of the team to see that when they showed up as an advisor, they were actually having an impact on the ROI for the firm.
Very interesting. Yeah, and like it makes sense. It's a constant battle, right? Because like you win here, but then other people still have old operating model, and they all individually almost need to be won over. So it's not like you do it once and like it sort of gets disseminated. Did you change anything about the org structure of the learning team or the roles or stuff like that in order to enable this transition?
Yeah, so we actually restructured the whole team. And so I moved to a relationship lead model. I even changed the name of it. We were called business partners. It's kind of a unique thing instead of learning partners, but I shifted to a relationship lead model, and people had multiple service lines. And so their job was really to go and understand the business, to make those relationships, to build the trust. We had, some people who were learning designers who used to be central out of a COE, and then they were decentralized into our team. They were part of, making sure that anything that had a shelf life was designed well. But the other thing that we did was we built an enablement team that, I call the flywheel for that one-off training. So again, I always have to deliver formal training for technical needs and things that will have CPE. But if it's a one-off, I don't want to spend a lot of time and energy and resources on developing that training. And the business is the expert, they're the SME anyways. So what we did was we built out frameworks that they can easily plug their information into and then deliver it as needed, get the CPE they need, but we don't have to invest a lot of time. That was hard, I think, for our business too. Not on the business end, they didn't mind having that as a piece of it, but for our folks who always wanted to do more and lean in and sort of, fix it and do something different, one of the ways that I got people out of that mindset of, well, I need to build this because that's how my performance is going to be assessed. There's that ownership of learning. We started work streams where we had people crossing over with different leaders inside of the team. So you didn't have a single structure that you worked in. You might be on the AI work stream this year and you're working with a leader who's not your manager. And so that agility to then be able to go back and work with another leader and another manager has allowed us to flex with the business in a way that at least traditionally we didn't do before. And again, it was painful. We practice radical candor on our team. We really lean into giving each other feedback, and we build a ton of trust with each other so that we can have that flexibility. So I think that restructuring and the ability to kind of move back and forth between different leaders and different projects and different teams has just made us more valuable to the business because we all know a little bit. Some of us know more deeply, some of the work that we do, but we can flex to where the need is. And so it doesn't feel like the capacity over here is really high and then, nobody over here has any time for anything. I really like the changes that we've made because we have this nice balance of relationship building with some key work streams. The work streams give us back a little bit of that control that L&D people like. We know they need AI training. We know it needs to be embedded. So we can kind of run with that without having to do too much with the business. And that feels sometimes a little easier and a little lighter than that,
Yeah.
hand-to-hand combat, as I joke, right? Like it's always that hard or challenging conversation. So it's just been a nice balance, but it took time to get there. I will say it took us about 9 months to get really comfortable in this new skin and be able to feel like we were really adding the value of what I call a future forward kind of L&D team.
What's really cool, by the way, 9 months seems like faster in my mind based on the transitions you made. What's really cool is that you essentially structure the teams like a consulting team. A consulting company would structure their teams, which is in consulting, your team constantly changes. And that's by necessity, but also it's how they develop their talent. They see patterns, they get to work with different people. That's how you learn the generalist skill set of an advisor. If you're always working with the same person, you don't build that muscle because you just rely on the relationships. I think you're actually like creating an environment where people can become a much more well-rounded consultant, which is like very cool. Like that it's sort of the structure you created in order to do it.
And it's exciting. It also, though, lets us talk to our consultants who are our business as consultants. So, had someone today who was like, how do I talk to them about this? And I said, ask them for their advice. They're challenging you. Say, listen, you do this for a living. If your client was challenging you, what would you do? Help me, lean in with that curiosity. And I think it's a more interesting way to practice. I don't come from traditional L&D. And so I really like digging into some of these relationships and figuring out how we can learn through the mess. But if you grew up through traditional L&D, it's a harder shift.
Yeah, for sure. But I love that. It's very cool. How well have different people made this transition on your team? What characteristics or traits allow them to make the transition better? And what kind of traits really hold them back?
Yeah. So, it's been a mixed bag. So there are some people who transitioned out of the team because it was uncomfortable. It wasn't what they signed up for. And I think this is true in all work, right? As
Of course.
things change, sometimes it's no longer the right place for
Yeah.
you or the right thing. And so I'm always very supportive of that in the right way. Vulnerability is so important in this work, and your ability to not have to have all of the information and the knowledge in the moment and being okay with that and getting back to someone is really hard, because learning, when you think about it, is we gather all the knowledge, we put it together in a package, and then we deliver it. But being a business advisor, you're asking good questions, you're listening, you're really curious, you're kind of digging in and challenging, and then you're coming back with some thoughts. That's really antithetical to the way that I think most L&D people have worked in the past in a lot of ways. And so I think embracing that vulnerability and not feeling like it makes you less professional or less able to work with people has been critical for our most successful people. Comfort in ambiguity. If you don't have that, you can't work in this environment. It's just too hard. We will never have all the answers. And I think the higher up you get in leadership, the fewer answers you actually have, even though people think you always have more. So that's been really helpful. I think the people who are perfectionists and have a hard time delivering something that is not perfect really have struggled, because there are a few times where we want to make sure it's, top quality. If we're putting a big program on, obviously we want to make sure it's good. But it's in the mess and the mistakes where we learn too. And so I think embracing that that's a good thing when everything's not perfect, that we can iterate, we can do a point 0.5 version and then get to the 1.0 next time. People who embrace that mindset have been more successful.
L&D would be more successful if it had a more like 80-20 mindset. Because in the effort that you're putting to making something from an 80% answer to 100, there's an opportunity cost to that. You could be doing other things that are hard leverage. And it's like that, right? Like that I think is often overlooked. And then businesses complain, why does this take 12 weeks to do? Like, why can't you deliver something in 2 weeks? And in fact, in 2 weeks, you probably could have delivered an 80% answer.
Yep,
That's good enough, right? And
exactly.
I feel like you're naturally trying to instill that in your teams.
It's so important, because what's perfect today is probably irrelevant tomorrow. And so
Right.
all
Yeah,
of
yeah,
that time that you spent doing that doesn't
yeah.
even matter anymore. And, I think it's well intended. A lot of people, think of themselves as artists and teachers in L&D. And so I get it. It's just not the way of work today. We need to be able to be agile as much as possible. And that means kind of getting people to the point where they can then go, and then they can make those mistakes and have their retro and then figure it out and come back. And I think that's where true learning actually happens. That 20% is probably where a lot of the learning is happening. We just didn't craft it.
I want to end with kind of a big picture question for you. This is something I think a lot about, so I'd be very curious what you think. I flip back and forth every day in what my answer is. Looking at the AI rollout today, what most companies are doing today is like using AI for efficiency, cut costs, automate, a bunch of stuff, reduce headcount. And like you see these high headlines everywhere. It's the easy thing to measure. It's the thing you can justify to the street, and all those things are happening. What doesn't seem to be happening as much in balance is the idea that if you only drive efficiency, you're all commoditizing yourselves. Like
Mm.
everybody has access to the same AI that you do. Well, how do you create differentiation then? Like it has to be the proprietary information, the people that you have, and their like innovation you can drive with them. But that seems to be like not talked about nearly as much as the former. I'm curious if you think L&D has a role to play there. And what is the role if you think L&D should be playing the role? I'd be curious to just get your thoughts.
Yeah, so, we joke in L&D that people chase the shiny tool, right? So the LMS, the LXP, AI is no different, and the business is chasing that shiny tool, not always taking the time to make sure all their processes, systems, and things are in place. And so the foundations will never change of excellence, right? And I think in a human world, there are always going to be people who want to work with a human because of the relationship, because of the ability to connect with someone, to do something that a machine or a computer cannot because it's limited to what they know. And so I think the space that L&D plays is in that leadership and advisory capacity. And I speak from consulting. I truly believe that our clients can go and get their information anywhere, and they can probably even figure out how to apply it. But they want to truly be understood. They want somebody who is more deeply connected with the things that they do in a way that Claude is not going to be able to bring to them. But to do that effectively, we need people who lead well, who understand how to develop other people through these processes, to develop critical thinkers who can identify slop, because, that's always going to be an issue as well. The challenge, I think, for us is how do you develop all of those things in people when they haven't done the work in the way that they might have done it in the past? So, professional services is a perfect example. Most of our campus hires came in and, they did the work and then they started to slowly progress through the layers. Well, what if we don't do that in the same way anymore? What if we cut out that layer? What does that do to then the expertise of that next level to be able to critique the work that an AI agent has built for them or done? Those are deeply human skills, right? We have to be able to question and be curious and challenge things in a way. Sure, AI can do that somewhat, but there's a difference in that ability to see nuance that it cannot. So we have to develop those skills in people in some ways. The colleges hopefully are helping, but it's the workplace that's going to drive those behaviors differently. And so I see L&D helping humans be more human, more opportunities for practice, more opportunities to connect with one another. The knowledge will come from the tool, but how we're going to work together and collaborate and actually understand things more deeply has to come from things where we're connecting. And that's a space where L&D really shines. We know how to make those connections and help people do that in really superior ways.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining today and sharing your perspective and stories. So many people in every conference talk about needing to make this shift. Very few do the structural work in addition to just like telling people to be more strategic to
Yeah.
make it possible. And I think you've taken these like decisions where you face pressure and challenges both from business partners but also internally because you had a vision, and that was really really cool to learn about it. So thanks, Kim.
Well, thank you so much. It was great talking with you today.